Hi, my name is Haled Dosari, and I'm delighted to be here with you and to present on women participation in Saudi Arabia, whether in the workforce or the public life in general. So Vision 2030 was launched to recognize basically a new transformation of the state. Mainly they've mentioned the objective of empowering women to materialize their potentials, and they've launched several programs. One of them is the National Transformation Program, which is a roadmap for the various ministries to develop objectives to fulfill the vision. However, the objectives of the National Transformation Program was very modest, only aiming to increase women in leadership position, for instance, by a mere 5% by 2020, increase, for instance, the women labor force participation or engagement in the workforce by 8% by 2030. There was no mentioning of empowering women legally, whether inside their homes or in public. The social services did not, Ministry of Labor and Social Services did not really work on the issue of restrictions of women mobility, and they instead provided an objective to provide affordable transportation for working women only, but not for women in general. There were small, modest initiatives done by various ministries, like the Sport Authority, which looked into licensing or providing licenses for gyms. Other than that, there was no real mention of how to address the restrictions or barriers enforced on women in their personal lives and in public in general. A 2016 study conducted by the World Bank looked into the legal gender barriers in Saudi Arabia and in 173 countries. The study was really informative because they looked beyond the availability of opportunities or economic opportunities or jobs. They looked into what kind of policies, when it involves women, that block their access to making decisions that would empower them to be effective in economy. So things like women inability to obtain passports or enroll in a certain line of education, whether inside or outside travel, in order to get more training or skills, building capacity and skills for the jobs, choosing where to live, confer their citizenships to children, ability to travel outside the home if needed without having to fulfill a clause of obedience to her guardian, obtain national identification number or identification cards, get their inheritance automatically and without any illegal restrictions, be represented in the legal decisions making or in the policy making level, or being for instance able to decide on a host of issues involving their own lives or the lives of their children. Now, in that study, those measures were conducted, and Saudi Arabia were found to be the highest country in the number of legal restrictions enforced on women, with married women having more restrictions than regular, than single women, because of the administration of the way marital properties is being administered, the problems of child custody or decisions over children, and the mandate to be obedient to their husbands. In Saudi Arabia as well, between 2012 and 2013, Jeddah Chambers of Commerce conducted a survey on 3,000 men and women, and they found that women complained from the lack of childcare available in affordable childcare facilities in workplaces, inability to commute to work, and they identified as well the lack of available job opportunities that would fit and match their own education. And for all these issues, it is not surprising that 80% of young women find it hard to find good jobs in Saudi Arabia, or even remain in those jobs once they have children and more responsibilities at home. So the findings of all those studies looks into the root causes of the Saudi women, which is the limitations in their autonomy and the limitations in their mobility, beyond the issue of education. And they generally stem from gender segregation and the male guardianship system. In particular, the male guardianship system offers a very good example in looking and examining how the religious ethnic identity of the political project promoted by the state and its institutions, including the religious institutions, has impacted women's lives. The state grants an assigned next of kin male relative, whether it's a husband or a brother or a father or even a son, if there is no one, the authority to decide on so many different issues and choices when it comes to women's personal and public life. So things like education, obtaining scholarships, getting training in a different place, deciding who to marry, getting a life-saving abortion, choice, for instance, to be a household head of the household, or travel documents in general, or finding jobs, particular jobs that may not be suitable to their guardians, get a release from a prison, or choose where to live, even if it's not within the same house as their guardian. In that sense, the system as well is not a mere policies or regulation. It's ingrained into the policy of the and the views of the legal system, which is mainly not codified but decided by individual judges who are religiously trained. So if a woman challenges the authority of the husband and becomes disobedient or chooses to make any of those decisions, she is being punished by the legal system. It also assumes, the system assumes, that men as guardians are better than women and superior as head of the household. And the state, by enforcing those kinds of ideologies and norms, they basically treat women as citizens by proxy, allowing women only to exercise their basic rights, civil rights or personal rights, as approved by their male guardians. So this is very similar to a system in which migrant workers are decided upon by, or the choices of migrant workers are decided by their employers under the sponsorship or the kafala system. The system, because of its impact on so many different issues or domains in women's lives, have been in the core of the advocacy by many activists for years, when it comes to women's ability to decide on personal status or on jobs or on any other issues, as well as women's ability to commute and be mobile, or to basically revoke the driving ban. Particularly since August last year in 2016, activists have created a lot of campaigning and a lot of advocacy online, which is the only space available for Saudi Arabia for civil society to mobilize and to voice concerns and grievances, to highlight the need to abolish the system. Many of those activists have faced persecution, threats, and intimidations. Stories, of course, of women who have been abused by their guardians, who have fled the countries because of abuses suffered by their guardians. All of these stories have come to surface, and in all of those efforts, the government remained non-responsive. In those stories, when activists tried to intervene and find legal redress for those women, it seemed that it is almost difficult and impossible to dislodge the authority of guardians over women or over children, unless the court decides to transfer the guardianship from one guardian to another. The story of Mariam Al-Ataibi is a classical example of an activist who has been very active on the online to support the campaign, and who has herself been under the pressure from living under an abusive guardian, and for trying to seek the help of the social services and the legal system without any effect, until she decided to find job and leave the house of her abusive family and live in a different city. And then she's currently arrested because her guardian filed a lawsuit against her, accusing her of absence from home and being disobedient to his authority. She's facing several charges. One of them is inciting public opinion against the order of the state, which is something that most of the activists faced once they are arrested. One important aspect of the guardianship system is the domestic violence. Domestic violence is a serious problem that is aggravated because of the guardianship system. It is really prevalent in Saudi Arabia because of the unequal power in women inside the family, that 40% of women suffer from domestic violence, one or more forms of violence during a lifetime, either by their husbands or by their fathers. Now, there is a protection from abuse law that was passed in 2013, but the law is not really prioritizing the safety and well-being of the women. Rather, it mandate reconciliation as a first line of action, whereby they subject women to further retribution from their guardians because they know that they report them to authorities. In addition, there is the problem of shelters, that even when a small proportion of women manage to be transferred by social services to shelters, they cannot take their children, their male children, if they were over 7 years of age, because shelters are not family friendly. They only house one sex, which is women only. The legal system has been very resistant to reforms, that there is still no codified personal status law that protects women's rights or protects women's autonomy or ability to decide on their lives. Still, judges enjoy wide discretion in decisions involving the family and personal, whether it's divorce or custody of children, or challenging the authority of guardians over basically marriage choices. The women lawyers were allowed to practice, but it's not to the level of appointing women lawyers in decision makings when it comes to formulating laws or policies involving women's position inside the family or outside. 1 year after the call to remove the male guardianship system, King Salman has issued a royal decree instructing all governmental ministries to examine their services and find out which of these services require a permission of a guardian, and to justify that based on a legal basis, which basically, bring us back to the point zero, because we know that travel, issuing of passports or travel or marriage or release from prison are all based on religious edicts or based on legal clauses. And it doesn't really tell us anything about, are they going to empower women inside their homes so that they're not bound by obedience clauses if they choose to live outside as adults, if they choose to choose jobs or enroll in jobs or education or apply for scholarships against the wishes of their guardians. So these things are not resolved yet, despite the royal order. So we often hear in response from the government when they respond to demands for gender reforms that that decisions involving women citizens should be handled gradually or in a balanced way. But those decisions are not treated the same way as decisions of national security, or, for instance, decisions on sovereign wealth, for instance, like selling Aramco, which is usually handled swiftly and without any engagement of citizens, without the voices of citizens being involved by a few people on top. And in addition, whatever policy reforms adopted by the state, they are usually very cosmetic, and they're not really addressing the main core of the problem. So, for instance, women appointments and top decision makings, though still very minimal compared to the number of leaders from men, but they're not enabled enough in order to examine gender reforms and suggest resolutions. For the Shura Council, women have been appointed as members in the Shura Council since 2013. But even though after the first term, 4 of those women who have lobbied extensively to change the laws of the personal status law, the anti-sexual harassment law, revoking the driving ban enforced on women, they were actually very resisted in this context, that they've asked to be relieved from their duty. They didn't want to continue working because they felt that the environment, the legal environment, and the way the decisions are being made within the Shura Council is counterproductive, that it will not get them to resolve any of the issues within that kind of structure. And civil society is very much constrained in the way that they are able to influence or mobilize public opinions or decision making. So the government has in 2015 enacted a law for civil society organization, but the law does not specify any independence for those. It's very complicated when it comes to societies working on issues relevant to human rights or policies or reforms. It treats those societies as charity more than engaged societies in politics and policy making. As well, it grants the authority to dismantle any society, to basically close off or approve any society to ministers. And it doesn't assign the courts or independent system as arbitrator, basically as another guarantee that those societies will not be closed. And often we find activists targeted for their online advocacy, with kind of ambiguous charges like disobedience to the ruler or wali al-amr, or engagement with foreign entities, like if they speak about the issues to foreign media, or if they were engaged with international intergovernmental institutions like international human rights organizations, or providing testimonies at Human Rights Council. So they're accused of defaming the reputation of the state, communicating with foreign entities, or inciting disobedience against the state or against the king. And under those kinds of restrictions, it's very difficult for the people in Saudi Arabia to work around issues of great importance, as to remove the actual restrictions enforced on women or on civil society or on men even. Because of the economic austerity measures enforced by the state without deliberation. In 2016, 50,000, thousands actually, maybe more than 50,000, were laid off from their jobs by private sector from Saudi citizens. And they created a lot of mobilization around Article 77 in the labor law, which allow companies and private employers to end the contracts of workers without ever, resorting to court. All kinds of those issues which hinder the engagement of citizens into the policy making, or enable them to be part of productive economic reforms, are difficult to dislodge under restrictions enforced in Saudi Arabia, whether on civil society, on decision making, on engagement of women in deciding on their own affairs. And even if they decide to appoint women as consultants, those who are sincerely working toward gender legal reforms are finding it very difficult to do so, and they find that their existence is mainly channeled to promote a positive image of the state rather than engage in meaningful reforms. Thank you for the opportunity.